Good evening.
Good evening.
Dan, nice to have you here, Professor Dan Kahneman. Congratulations on a great book and a great reception to the book.
Thank you.
The Thinking Fast and Slow has become a phenomenon in the market now. Everyone's talking about it, everyone's buying it. And I thought what we would do this evening is just give a quick Q&A and get your take on some important parts of the book. So one of the things I learned in economics class is that you could actually plan how a firm works and how society works on the assumption that people are rational, the so-called rational man. What do you think of that assumption?
Well, I mean, clearly it isn't correct. I mean, economics is really not about planning, particular institutions. It's about how the market works. And so you could do economics assuming that people are rational, even if they're not. But there are many contexts where it makes a big difference that people are not rational.
Yes, and your book, I think, is very powerful in describing many of those contexts. So one of the things you describe are the two ways in which people make decisions. People make decisions intuitively, using their intuition, so-called system one. And then they also sometimes, more rarely, are deliberative, so-called system two. Can you summarize what the strengths and weaknesses are of those two?
Well, sure. I mean, system one is what happens automatically. It's fast thinking, it's automatic. It's always involved. That is, even when you're deliberating, system one has been active. And a lot of, what we think are our reasoned opinions and our reasoned decisions are strongly influenced by things that happen that we have no idea about, that happen in system one, that happen in the intuitive and largely unconscious process of memory.
And is that true? Does that apply most effectively when people are simply doing their jobs? They're flying an airplane or playing the piano or things like that?
Well, when people are doing their job with expertise, then they are, to a large extent, they can be on automatic pilot. So you can have people actually, very experienced pianists can listen to speech and understand it while they're playing. Less experienced pianists can't do both of these at once. So when people are very skilled, operations become automatic and they become what I call fast thinking or system one or intuitive. Right. That's what happens there.
And how about system two? What are the strengths and weaknesses there?
Well, system two is what happens when you're paying attention. It's what demands mental work. It's what demands mental effort. It's involved in computation. It's involved in deliberation. It's involved in deliberate memory search. And it's involved in self-control.
So one of the powerful points of your book is where both of the systems fail. And so system one, what you see is what there is, I guess. System one will often lead people down paths that are not productive for them. Can you give a couple of examples of that?
If I mention to you that there is that character called Steve, who is a meek and tidy soul with a passion for detail, and now I ask you, is this person who was sampled at random from the population more likely to be a librarian or a farmer? Most people immediately see the similarity of Steve to their stereotype of librarian, and many people will say that is a system two, will endorse the intuition of system one, that it's a librarian. Now, in fact, the statistics of the situation are that there are 20 times as many male farmers as there are male librarians, so it's very likely that Steve is actually a farmer. But that is the kind of thinking that doesn't even occur to system two. So system two endorses the wrong intuition, if you will, of system one and ignore the statistics. This is very common.
So it goes to the first level of analysis. It sounds like the stereotype of the librarian without going to the second. Well, one of the interesting things about system two that you described, one of the problems with it, is the so-called planning fallacy. Can you describe what that is?
Well, the planning fallacy is that, if you have a plan, it's typically a best case, but it provides what we call an anchor to your estimate of what's really going to happen. So planning fallacies tend to be, people who are subject to the planning fallacy tend to be extremely optimistic in their estimates of what is actually going to happen. And that is all over the place. You see overruns of time, and you see overruns of cost, and you see overruns, I mean, the overruns of time among authors are very common. I'm sure you've experienced that.
And people who write new legislation think it's going to cost X, and it ends up costing 2X.
Yeah.
And people who build out their offices budget it for X, and it costs 2X. And
yeah, it's true about kitchens. People spend about twice as much as they expected in remodeling their kitchens.
One of the great ideas in the book that you attributed to Gary Klein was the idea of doing a pre-mortem on important choices. Can you describe that?
Yeah, I think it's actually one of the very few pieces of advice that are unequivocally good advice that we can give. Gary Klein had that idea of that when a plan is about to be adopted by an organization, then you bring together a bunch of people who know about the plan, and you have them for a brief, it takes an hour or less than an hour, and the premise is this: you tell them, or somebody tells them, suppose we adopted this plan, and a year has passed, and it's been a disaster. Now you have in front of you a slip of paper or a page. Write the history of that disaster. That's a very good idea for many reasons. And people do tend to produce, quite imaginative and quite useful scenarios of disaster.
It sounds like what we should require, we should have a constitutional amendment to require Congress to do pre-mortems.
Well, I mean, they're sufficiently paralyzed even without this, so I'm not sure that if you paralyze them further, it would be a net gain.